Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a general political video, an economic video, a video pertaining particularly to the UK and Europe, the EU. And I want to respond to a couple of comments. It's going to be a relatively short video, this, honestly. I just want to respond to a couple of comments because they're a little bit grating. I have to be perfectly honest, and I need to explain why I do certain things, while also admitting that I have a bias, which I try and do as much as possible. Right? If I'm explaining something, I'm saying I'm coming from this point of view. These are my political leanings, and when it comes to something like Brexit, I voted to remain. I actually publicly debated the issue before and after the election, so I will be somewhat biased. However, I still believe X, Y, and Z, and hopefully I can show you receipts for why I believe so. Okay, I talked about the trade deal between the UK and the US and between the UK and India yesterday in a video, and I did mention Brexit and the cost that Brexit has incurred on the UK economy. And although I didn't talk in any depth about that, and someone said, I think in another comment, where's your evidence for this? You're just pulling stuff out of your backside. And I'm like, no, actually, my opinions are always evidence-based. And if they're not, if they're just a hunch and intuition, I will let you know. But otherwise, they are based on stuff that I've read. Now, if we always had to give the evidence for every opinion or statement or value judgment that we make every single time we make it, then we could never have a conversation. Because I'd say to you that a Bugatti's faster than an Austin Metro, and you'd have to say, well, what's the evidence for that? And then I'll have to go and find some peer review article on how the Bugatti Veyron is faster than the Austin Metro, and then give you all the data on that. No, let's just assume I know what I'm talking about and that car is faster than the other. We can have, if you want to debate that, then let's have that, but I can't establish my data sets at every single point. Otherwise, I could say it's sunny today, and you go, I want the evidence for that, and I'm like, okay, and then conversations become absolutely impossible. So at some point we have to generalize, but the assumption, hopefully, from you guys for me, is that my generalizations are, or my statements, my conclusions, my opinions are based on some kind of foundations, right? So, okay, let's go to just discuss Brexit generally, because this opinion I see quite a lot. So Nick Stanton says, Jonathan, I think you need to move on from Brexit. It's done. We are in a different world now. And then you can add to this, he's right, Jonathan, you do need to move on. You are becoming dogmatic. Let it go, man. There are positives and negatives to Brexit, and you feel that the bang was not worth the squeeze, which is fine, but it's impacting your analysis on issues. Now, you will find that the only people that have these opinions are generally people who just disagree with my opinion on Brexit. So I said we should have remained. Guaranteed, I'd bet some good money that those three people, and thank you very much for being part of the community and commenting and everything. This is not having a go, at you more generally, just this point does grate a little. Like, I would bet all three of these people would have voted to leave, right? And so what this is essentially doing, in my opinion, is saying, oh, Jonathan's saying something I disagree with. I voted against this. There's evidence that it wasn't a good idea. I feel uncomfortable for that. So therefore, I'm going to attack Jonathan and tell him not to talk about this because it makes me feel uncomfortable, because I don't like talking about the evidence that maybe Brexit was a bad idea. That's me being pretty cynical about that. But why I talk about this, and will continue to talk about this, and I will take your opinions on board, and thank you for that. But I will also somewhat ignore them for good reason. And the reason I'm ignoring them is because no one else in the world is thinking that's in any position of importance, i.e. politicians, economists, and business people. So this is just a survey of literally some articles that I've just copied and pasted from just really recently, pretty much. And this is coming out from today. This came out 58 minutes ago. The UK must do everything we can to rebuild trade ties with the EU, says Bank of England governor. So our Bank of England governor has just said exactly what I've been saying, right? And yet, that person should know the most about our economy, you would argue, or one of the, he's in a far better position to comment on our economic outlook than I am, and than Nick Stanton or Terry Hudson or Michael Gale, right? So, like, I don't see them sending emails to the governor of the Bank of England and said, just leave it alone, mate, leave it alone. Don't bother talking about this. It's been and done. It's gone. Like, we need to not talk. No, our relationship with Europe, and that's what I mean by talking about Brexit, our relationship with Europe, we need to get closer to Europe because Brexit economically hurt us. Now, before I go and talk a little bit more in detail about my position there, let's just go through this. So this is being widely reported right now. UK needs to build trading relationship with the EU, the Bank of England boss says. The TUC, so this is a major union in the UK, recently said major support for closer relationship with the EU, including with reform-leaning voters from their own membership, right? So closer trading relationship with the EU, more important than ever in an increasingly fraught and volatile world, says the TUC. Now, these people might well have been the kind of working class union voter in the EU referendum, probably sided more often than not with Leave, especially when you look at where a lot of the Leave vote came from. So, this is interesting, okay? Now, if I'm not allowed to talk about this and not supposed to talk about this, isn't it weird that we've got the Bank of England governor talking about it? We've got one of the biggest unions talking about this, and more than half of reform-leaning voters who voted Labour in 2024 but will now vote Reform support a closer UK-EU relationship. So, you know, people on the ground are talking about this. We've got Brexit reset needs to move UK as close as possible to the EU. Starmer is warned. Who's he warned by? He's warned by the British Chambers of Commerce, calling for, quote, as much alignment as possible ahead of a move in Parliament to make the adoption of Brussels regulations the default position for UK. So you've got the British Chamber of Commerce saying we need to align ourselves with the EU as much as possible. We've got Britain's support, Britons themselves, like the latest survey, Britain support rejoining the single market, even if it means free movements. 7 in 10 Britons support a closer relationship with the EU than we have now. 52% of Britons now believe that UK leaving the EU was a wrong decision, and so on and so forth. And actually, that's November 2023. Now, that's even higher. So that was several years ago, or 1.5 years ago. The latest figures are even higher. So we've got, at least, it depends which survey you have, the latest YouGov, it has pretty much, the latest YouGov had 49% of people wanting to actively rejoin, and only 30% of people wanting not to rejoin, to stay out, and the rest of people not sure and this and that. So like, you've got far more people wanting to rejoin than wanting to stay out. And you've also got more people now thinking Brexit was a bad idea than ever before. So there's a really clear majority, depending on what survey you're looking at. So again, the people in general are believing this, whether Nick Stanton and Michael Gale and Terry Hudson, don't believe it or not. We've got Politico here. The Tories are gone and Britain is moving closer to Europe again. So we are moving closer to Europe. People think we should move closer to Europe. People think we should be aligned as much as possible with EU. Rachel Reeves, our Chancellor, suggests the UK trade with the EU is more important than the US. And that was from the 25th of April. So that was just, 10 days ago. Our trade is more important with the EU than with the US. The UK and EU look for a 2025 reset. Britain is back on the European stage as it pledges to reset relations with the EU, says Euro News here. And that's from back end, the second half of last year. UK poised to agree post-Brexit youth visa scheme and a major step towards closer ties with the EU. That's from yesterday. So we are now looking at readopting some of the policies from the EU, or some of the benefits of the EU, free movement people. We can have young people being able to go kind of, I guess, visa-free into the EU again. New data shows that the UK could be £26 billion better off if we had a closer alignment with the EU. We have the OBR coming out with the catastrophic cost of Brexit on UK trade, revealed in a stark warning, and that warning can be read here in their analysis. The OBR that says that basically we've lost 15% of our trade due to Brexit. You've got another analysis here from the Aston Business School Centre for Business Prosperity saying, and this one looks at there being quite a cost. So between 21 and 2023, monthly data shows a 27% drop in UK exports and a 32% reduction in imports to and from the EU, etc., like all loads of data in there. And then you've got this paper, for example, the Trade and Cooperation Agreement for 4 years on, manifesto to reset UK-EU trade. That's a British Chambers of Commerce. So they then give you loads of surveys from small businesses saying, the non-trade barriers such as bureaucracy and time and all this stuff is negatively hitting business, and you're looking at stuff. Anyway, the point is that my opinions are based on evidence, right? That I don't just pick them out in my posterior. But every major political analyst and economic analyst and organisation at the moment, political organisation, is talking about our position in Europe and our relationship with the EU. So the idea that I need to just move on and Brexit is done. No, Brexit is this evolving thing. We're out of Europe, but we either get back into Europe or we get much closer with Europe without going in, without having free movement of people or whatever. But that is because the reason why everyone's saying we should go in that direction is because Brexit hurt us. So and I'm not talking about, of course, immigration. I'm not talking about other ideas or reasons for Brexit. I'm really talking about the economic impact here, because we're talking an awful lot about economics at the moment because UK's growth has been hit. Interestingly, the EU growth is looking quite good at the moment, partly to do with the low cost of energy, partly to do with the dollar being low as well. But there's some interesting analysis coming out to say the EU, Europe in general, is doing fairly well economically speaking, while the US is kind of committing economic harakiri. But anyway, that's another discussion. I just want to say no, I am not going to ignore this, because if I'm ignoring this, I'm sticking my fingers in my ears and then not commenting on what everyone else is commenting on. Like, if I have to shut up about this, then the government has to shut up, the EU has to shut up, the Bank of England has to shut up, business schools have to shut up, British Chambers of Commerce has to shut up, BBC, The Independent, iNews, The Telegraph, I was looking at an article with them then, Politico, all of these Euronews, they all have to shut up as well. So, I'm a little bit indignant about this, and it generally comes from a position of, I think you don't like talking about Brexit because you're a Brexiteer, and I am coming from this, and you like my videos in general, but when I talk about Brexit, it makes it uncomfortable for you because there's cognitive dissonance, because on the one hand, you like my videos and broadly what I say in other contexts, but as soon as I move over into something that you disagree with, then you find it uncomfortable. And so you'd rather tell me to shut up and stop being dogmatic and stop talking about this. And I'm not being dogmatic. I quite often say I'm being fairly dogmatic economically, because I think the case is clear cut. It's absolutely clear cut. If you're only talking about the economy, then Brexit was a bad idea. But of course, we aren't. In fact, most people, like I've said before, are talking about immigration when it comes to, I think, when it came to the vote for Brexit. And if that's your thing, then the conversation is a completely different conversation, right? So, and actually that's kind of what Michael Gale is saying here. There are positives and negatives to Brexit, and you feel the bang was not worth the squeeze. So that kind of is my point. But it's impacting your analysis on issues. No, I don't think it is. I think these are the issues. First of all, we need to be talking about this, but I don't think it massively impacts my opinion on much else. Hopefully I'm being honest about the impact, or when it is impacting, by saying, look, I am biased. I do have an opinion where leaving the EU was a bad idea. But then if you're solely concerned about immigration, then okay, you might have a different conclusion. However, interestingly, immigration has gone up since we left the EU, and we've replaced white Eastern European workers with brown Southeast Asian workers. And I find that quite ironic, given that, and I can say this from personal very much personal experience here, where some of my extended family on both sides, my side and my partner's side, are, not some of them, most of them are hugely pro-leave, like massively. And I don't want to be too controversial, but there's an element of racism in there as well, and I know that from personal experience. I'm sorry, but there is that. And so, I know the importance of immigration for very many people, But for them, there is this irony that we don't want these Eastern European immigrants coming in, so no, we don't want free movement of people. Get out of the EU, and then it turns out that we either need those jobs to be done by someone, and so we're importing them in from these workers in from Southeast Asia, or etc., etc. So the point is that the immigration has not been contained and is still an issue, and it doesn't seem like Brexit particularly shifted the needle on that anyway. But there's lots of arguments we can have concerning that. I will continue to talk about Brexit. It is an absolutely vital component of our political and economic landscape presently and going forward. And what we do with our relationship with Europe is going to be one of the most fundamental discussion points and policy points for this government and the next in the UK. I would maintain that sustainable, decent, robust growth for the UK is contingent upon us becoming economically closer aligned with the EU. And in terms of the Ukraine war and our national security and defence, the EU will be saying, we want you closer in terms of defence, but in order to have you closer in terms of defence, we need to be doing some deals here and there, and there's going to have to be some give and take. So fishing rights over here might have to go in order for you to get BAE systems operating in Europe to allow you to access $150 billion euros worth of EU defence funding. And so, all of these things are connected, whether you like it or not, and I will therefore have to speak about it. Anyway, it's a bit ranty from me, and thank you for commenting, and thank you. I know people like Nick Stanton and really long-time supporters of the channel, so thank you. But I am going to continue talking about this stuff because you can't not. So there you go. Anyway, take care. Speak soon.